So you want to change your floating trem or Floyd Rose and you think there's nothing to it. While I agree with you, it's fairly easy to swap out a trem, there are some small but important things that you cannot miss when you switch out a floating tremolo. In this video, I'm going to give you the top 5 things to do or don't do when changing out a floating tremolo. Make sure you stick around to the end for the most important tip that's going to keep your trem in good, long-standing condition. This is the axe. Let's go! Alright, yeah, changing out a trem isn't the most technical thing you can do on a guitar. But there are several points of failure when you're switching out one of these bad boys that can lead to your trem being damaged and even your guitar being damaged. In this video, I'll use some of my own gear, probably pull out some of my guitars, and I'll use this Jackson licensed Floyd Rose that came out of an old guitar that, you know, I'm probably done every mistake that I'm going to tell you not to on this bad boy because I'm a goddamn idiot. So let's start with tip number 1. Know your studs. The studs or posts are the big bolts which the knife edges of the trem sit and kind of rock back and forth and give you that tremolo action. So knowing what you currently have on your guitar, the spacing and all that stuff is really important because replacement trems don't always match up as beautifully as you want them to. For instance, the original Floyd Rose requires studs or posts to be spaced about 74 millimeters on center. If you're upgrading from, say, a Wilkinson trem to maybe like a floating style Floyd Rose, Wilkinson trems can actually have variable stud spacing, so you're gonna have to make sure that the stud spacing on your guitar will match up to the original Floyd Rose design. One more consideration with the posts or studs is that you really need to know how big your stud holes are that are in the wood of your guitar. The actual studs sit inside a bushing that can be adjusted, and the bushing's way bigger than the actual stud. The stud is basically made up of 2 parts. It's got the bushing, which the stud goes into, and then the actual stud, which is scored so that the knife edge can actually pivot. Now if you're going from, say, like a Floyd Rose to a Goto, the Goto bushings of the actual stud assembly are a lot bigger and more robust than the Floyd Rose, so you're gonna have to do some routing. So make sure you consider that. Alright, tip number 2, check your ROUT. The worst thing is when you get your trem in the mail, you bought it secondhand from someone else, you've installed the studs, and you go to throw in the trem and it's like a big clunk. And it's not free to move up and down. You can't dive, you can't pull up. Basically, there's some type of obstruction in there in the wood and the ROUT doesn't match up. Make sure for whatever trem you're putting in, you've looked at the routing diagrams that they usually give from the manufacturer. Floyd Rose, for the most part, if you go on their website, look up a trem, you can scroll down and see routing diagrams and they'll give you a nice PDF of all the measurements, usually in millimeters, sometimes inches, and you can gauge and measure your guitar and see if the trem will actually fit in it. Sometimes the routing dimensions aren't too different and you can just use a Dremel tool or a file and route out the actual wood yourself. It's usually a small fix, but make sure you check it out because some trems just really won't fit in a certain route. Alright, tip number 3, and this is the one that I really need you guys to listen to, please. Never adjust the height of the floating trem if strings are at full tension. This is a pretty quick way to ground down the knife edges of your trem. It can be exponentially bad if you have a trem that's made out of something like zinc alloy or a soft metal. Adjusting the studs with pressure from the knife edges will cause some recessions in the base plate or just the knife edges themselves, but then the knife edges can also cut in and continue to score the actual stud itself. Now hopefully you can see it, but I've ground down these little recessions right here on each side, and that's because I would always adjust the height under maximum string tension or just when it was tuned. Don't make my mistakes. So the correct way to adjust the height of your new floating trem is this. So unlock the nut at the top and then make sure you detune the strings to where you can at least pull the knife edge off the stud just a little bit. From there, make any adjustments on the stud to bring the tremolo up or down and make it to where you like it. Doing this every time you adjust the height of your trem will really give some longevity to the piece of equipment, especially if you're using something like a Floyd Rose Special or a licensed trem that has some softer metals on it. Tip 4, verify the string spacing of your new tremolo. So there's a theme or law when replacing tremolos, actually just like using floating trems in general. It's basically Murphy's Law. What can go wrong with a trem absolutely will. Any problem you can think of, someone has had it with a tremolo because they're all different and they all bring something different to the table. For instance, not all trems are intonated the same way, and that goes exactly the same for string spacing. While most floating trems usually have string spacing that's around 0.420 inches, that's not always the case. For instance, Floyd Rose makes or made a low profile pro version in which the string spacing is closer to 0.400, and that's a closer string spacing, and that might feel a little bit different when you replace the trim. If you're used to a certain string spacing and you buy the trim and you find that it's something that you don't like, there's going to be some growing pains there. So this is something you can check before you actually buy it and during like your shopping process. Looking into it beforehand will save you a big letdown in the future if that's something that bothers you. All right, we made it to the end. Tip number 5. And this is crucial, guys. Never mismatch your metals. So what do I mean by this? For instance, never get like a titanium trim and then install it with the old zinc alloy studs from your previous setup. I see this a lot when guitarists get a trim like secondhand that doesn't come with the studs and then they just throw it into their old hardware. The problem with this is that the stronger metal will actually ground down or damage the softer metal over time. Also, some metals are more homogeneous in their makeup and will wear away similar metals that are of lower quality. Simply put, when you're swapping a trim, make sure you match the metal or metal quality between the knife edges and the studs. I've been specifically pointing out knife edges because some trims come with replaceable ones. The Schaller Tremolo comes with replaceable knife edges made of hardened steel and a base plate that's more of like an alloy product. Now, I've seen people replace the actual hardware or screws of the trim for kind of like an upgrade. I've never really seen anything bad come from this, but also you're mixing metals. So if you're throwing like say titanium or stainless steel screws into a trim that's zinc alloy, you might mess with the threads of the actual trim. But I'll leave that one up to you guys. Let me know if you've had any problems with that and let us know in the comments. All right guys, that's the end of this video. I hope it helped. I just want to thank each and every one of you for stopping by the channel. If you haven't subscribed already, consider subscribing below for more. And if you have a minute, I have affiliate links in the bottom and please connect with me on social media. With that said, I will catch you later.